You know, for decades, education in Pakistan, and honestly, in a lot of places around the world, was entirely defined by this intense, high stress, exam centric culture. It was literally all about rewarding kids for just memorizing facts, right? But over the last 20 years or so, this massive, kind of quiet shift has been happening behind the scenes. It's all thanks to the creation of the National Education Assessment System, or NEAS. This centralized agency operates under the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training, and let me tell you, it completely revolutionized how the country tracks actual learning. Today, we're going to break down exactly how they pulled off this incredible transformation. The core shift here is absolutely profound. Think about it. Instead of punishing a single 10-year-old student for failing a rote memorization test, what if we diagnosed the health of the entire education system itself? Traditional board exams, they're really just designed to pass, fail, or rank an individual child. But a diagnostic assessment, that functions on a massive scale to pinpoint systemic vulnerabilities, resource gaps, and regional inequalities. It's totally flipping the script. It's no longer about giving a kid a bad grade. It's about handing the government a real, actionable roadmap to actually fix the schools. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the measurement vacuum. Then, enter the NEAS, followed by the science of assessment, data-driven discoveries, and we'll wrap up with the global standard. Let's get right into it. Part 1, the measurement vacuum. Every great innovation usually starts with a glaring problem, right? Well, in Pakistan's education sector in the late 1990s, that problem was a total lack of data. During what was known as the Social Action Program era, the government was, well, essentially flying blind. Now, through international movements pushing education for all, they were actually doing a great job getting more kids into classrooms. The enrollment numbers were meticulously documented. But the big question was, were these kids actually learning anything? Early on, isolated studies from groups like UNESCO started to reveal a pretty terrifying reality. Student competency levels were falling way, way below international benchmarks. The kids were definitely in the seats, but the actual learning? It just wasn't happening. And the craziest part is, the government had absolutely no standardized way to even measure that gap. Which brings us to Section 2. Enter the NEAS. To solve this massive data vacuum, a specialized analytical engine basically had to be built from scratch. You really have to look at the wild evolution of this agency. Back in 2003, it launched as a World Bank-funded project, and it had some heavy backing from the UK's Department for International Development. But then, fast forward to 2010, the 18th Constitutional Amendment dissolved the Federal Ministry of Education and pushed all educational authority down to the individual provinces. Now, normally, something like that could have easily destroyed a federal tracking system. But instead, NEAS totally adapted. They became this vital, collaborative umbrella body that ensured minimum national baselines. Finally, in 2022, they consolidated operations with the Academy of Educational Planning and Management, creating what is essentially an ultimate educational intelligence nexus. Pretty cool, right? Now, if you've ever worked in a government bureaucracy, you know it can be an absolute nightmare of red tape. But NEAS cleverly solved this by strictly aligning specialized experts to specific civil service ranks. This ensures the whole machine runs without constant bottlenecks. By sticking to standard basic pay scales, from the BPS 20 Director General who handles the big strategic alliances, all the way down to the BPS 17 Assistant Directors running the field ops, NEAS guarantees that the highly technical work, like statistical modeling and test construction, is handled by actual subject matter experts, not just general administrators shuffling paperwork all day. Moving right along to Part 3, the science of assessment. Okay, let's dive into the actual mechanics of how they pull off these massive national evaluations, because it's a huge undertaking. We've all taken those tests that just asked us to, regurgitate a date or a math formula we crammed into our heads the night before. But Psychometrics is totally different, and it's really the secret weapon here. The British Council actually organized intensive workshops for the NEAS staff to master this science. Using something called item response theory, test writers carefully craft questions that are specifically designed to see if a child can actually apply a concept to solve a brand new problem. It targets logical deduction rather than just basic surface-level memory recall. It's a real game changer. And listen, this isn't about rushed, stressful annual testing. The stakes for national policy are simply too high for that. That's exactly why they use a staggered 3 to 4 year research cycle. It's all about getting deep, actionable data. Step 1, they design and pilot the questions. Step 2, they roll them out securely across all the provinces. Next comes the massive psychometric data analysis, which uses high-speed optical mark scanners. And finally, step 4, and this is absolutely crucial, they don't just sit on the data. They host national dissemination conferences to make sure textbook boards and curriculum designers actually use these findings to make real, tangible changes. So how do you test millions of kids without going completely bankrupt? Well, you don't. Trying to run a nationwide census every time would be incredibly slow and wildly expensive. Instead, their statistical wing uses a really neat method called two-stage stratified random cluster sampling to get a highly accurate snapshot of the entire nation's learning outcomes. First, they stratify, which basically just means grouping, schools by urban versus rural, boys versus girls, and public versus private. Then they randomly select classrooms within those carefully modeled groups. To put those logistics into perspective, in just the 2016 to 2017 cycle alone, they managed a sample size of over 30,000 students across 1,500 schools. By testing these 30,000 strategically selected 4th and 8th graders, they generate a mathematically rigorous dataset. And that smaller dataset, it accurately reflects the educational reality of literally millions of students nationwide. It's like a giant puzzle where a few key pieces reveal the whole picture. That brings us to Section 4, Data-Driven Discoveries. Because, let's be honest, all of this robust infrastructure is completely pointless if it doesn't reveal what's actually happening inside the classroom, right? For years, a lot of educators suspected that the old teaching methods just weren't working anymore. But NEAS finally provided the hard, undeniable proof that policymakers needed. Across consecutive testing cycles in subjects like mathematics and general science, students were absolutely acing the straight memorization questions. But the very second a question required logical deduction or actual problem solving, scores literally fell off a cliff. This definitively proved that the curriculum simply wasn't equipping kids for complex analytical thinking. And this was the exact spark that triggered a huge push away from rote memorization. But beyond just the test scores, the data revealed some amazing what they call pedagogical triggers. During these assessments, NEAS also hands out questionnaires to teachers, parents, and head teachers. By correlating the kids' test scores with these questionnaires, they uncovered these deeply human elements that can completely make or break a child's learning experience. For instance, and I found this absolutely mind-blowing, just the simple act of a teacher actively using a classroom writing board or taking a few extra minutes to write structured feedback on homework dramatically boosted a child's comprehension. Even logistical factors, like having a shorter travel distance to school, massively impacted their ability to learn. It is so empowering to see that small, practical changes can yield such massive, massive results. And finally, we arrive at Section 5. The global standard. Because as the agency matured, it just wasn't enough to only compare domestic provinces against each other anymore. So why the number 500? Well, this specific number represents the calculated mean score adopted by NEAS, which establishes a 50% correct response rate baseline. By using this really precise mathematical baseline, which includes a standard deviation boundary of 100, NEAS was able to move entirely away from crude, outdated percentage grading. This scale isn't just arbitrary either. It was specifically chosen to integrate perfectly with the most respected international benchmarks. The ultimate goal here, the whole shebang, was transparent comparison on a global scale. By adopting the exact same evaluation scale used by the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, better known as TIMSS, NEAS successfully orchestrated Pakistan's historic first-ever participation in this global assessment. That basically broke the country out of its isolated measurement vacuum and plugged its educational data directly into the global community. The whole journey of NEAS really proves that improving a national education system doesn't just mean throwing money at building more schools. It means having the courage to scientifically measure what is actually happening inside the minds of the students. Think about it. If we aren't rigorously, scientifically testing for true understanding, how can we ever expect a system to improve? I'll leave you to ponder that vital question, as it is the absolute driving principle behind this incredible assessment engine every single day.